I used to believe that marriage meant finding a second family, a circle that would hold you close when storms came. I was naive. My name is Emily. I'm 34 years old, and if I've learned anything from my marriage, it's that sometimes the people who smile at you across the dinner table are the very ones sharpening knives under it. When I married David, I knew his family was close-knit, almost suffocatingly so. His mother, Margaret, was the matriarch in every sense of the word, polished, commanding, adored by her children. I respected her at first, even admired the way she held her family together with traditions, dinners, birthdays, and elaborate gatherings that seemed more like social events than private moments. But over time, admiration gave way to unease. Margaret didn't just host dinners, she orchestrated them like performances. And for her, I was always the unwanted extra on stage. It began with small things so subtle I convinced myself I was imagining them. Invitations that must have gotten lost, seating arrangements that pushed me to the end of the table, whispered conversations that fell silent when I entered the room. David brushed it off, told me I was reading too much into it. "That's just how Mom is," he would say, pressing a kiss to my forehead as if that excused it. But I felt the sting every single time. The breaking point came with Margaret's 60th birthday. It was supposed to be a grand celebration, a dinner at her favorite restaurant, a private dining room, flowers flown in from Italy, a string quartet hired just to play her favorite songs. Everyone in the family was buzzing about it for weeks. Everyone except me. Because I never received an invitation. I found out about it by accident. David's sister, too tipsy to watch her words, mentioned the all-family dinner in front of me. My stomach dropped, my face burning, but I smiled tightly and said nothing. Later that night, I asked David. He froze, guilt flickering across his features, and then admitted the truth: his mother had planned it without me. She didn't want me there. He tried to soften the blow, saying she wanted it to be intimate, but the words sliced me open. Intimate. As if I wasn't family. As if I were an intruder in my own husband's life. I lay awake for hours that night, staring at the ceiling, my chest aching with humiliation. How dare she? How dare they? I had given my heart to this marriage, my time, my love, my everything, and still I was nothing to them. I thought about calling her, screaming into the phone, demanding an explanation. But anger without strategy is wasted breath. And I wanted more than to be heard. I wanted to be felt. The idea came to me slowly, like a whisper that grew louder with every heartbeat. If Margaret wanted to exclude me from her precious dinner, then fine, I would give her exactly what she asked for. But I would also make sure she never forgot the cost of her cruelty. The next day, while David was at work, I called the restaurant. My voice was calm, measured the voice of a dutiful daughter-in-law who had every right to speak for the family. I told them the reservation was canceled, that Margaret had decided on something else. The manager hesitated, but when I confirmed the name, the time, the details, he agreed. The reservation was erased with a few keystrokes. Just like that, the grand birthday celebration dissolved into nothing. When the evening arrived, I imagined the scene: the family gathering at the restaurant, Margaret sweeping in with her diamonds and her pride, only to be told there was no reservation, no flowers, no quartet, no dinner. The humiliation would be public, unforgettable, a mirror held up to the face of the woman who had tried to erase me. I didn't attend, of course. I stayed home, lit a candle, and poured myself a glass of wine. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. Not because I had ruined her night, but because I had reclaimed something she had tried to take from me: my dignity. What followed was chaos. My phone buzzed with messages from David, from his sisters, from Margaret herself. Accusations, confusion, disbelief. I didn't answer. I let them stew in the silence, each of them wondering how such a perfect plan could unravel. And though David's anger was fierce when he came home, I met it with a calmness he couldn't penetrate. "Now you know," I told him quietly. "Now you know what it feels like to be left out." The storm that night was only the beginning, because secrets have a way of unraveling once one thread is pulled. And what I didn't know yet, what none of us knew, was that Margaret's cruelty was only the surface of a much darker family truth. The silence that followed the canceled dinner was heavier than any storm. Messages poured into my phone, David's frustration sharp, his sister's fury dripping with entitlement, and Margaret's clipped words laced with venom. She demanded an explanation, demanded I account for my audacity. I gave her nothing. Their confusion, their anger, their humiliation, that was my answer. For years they had denied me a seat at their table. Now I had denied them their stage. David stormed into our home that night, his voice raised before the door even closed. "What the hell did you do, Emily? Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was for my mother? For all of us." His face was flushed. His fists clenched, the golden boy reduced to Margaret's mouthpiece. I sat calmly on the sofa, my wineglass steady in my hand. "Yes," I said softly. "I know exactly how humiliating it was. That's why I did it." His jaw dropped, his anger faltering into disbelief. "You ruined her birthday." "No," I corrected. "She ruined it herself the moment she decided I wasn't worthy of being part of her family. I just made sure she got a taste of her own cruelty." For once, he didn't have a rebuttal. His face twisted, torn between loyalty to me and fear of his mother's wrath. That was the moment I realized he would never truly choose me, not over them. The days that followed exposed cracks I had ignored for too long. Margaret wasted no time in painting me as unstable, manipulative, vindictive. The family repeated her words like scripture, each echo sharper than the last. But beneath their outrage was something else: fear. They knew what I had done was only possible because I had access. Because I was smarter than they ever gave me credit for. And as much as Margaret despised me, she also underestimated me. That was her mistake. The truth began to unravel quietly at first. Conversations cut short when I entered the room. Bank statements left carelessly on David's desk. A phone call Margaret hadn't meant me to overhear. Each thread I tugged revealed more of the tapestry they had tried to hide from me. The Caldwell family's power wasn't as solid as it appeared. It was cracked porcelain painted over with gold. Investments gone sour, properties mortgaged, a reputation built on appearances teetering on collapse. I remember the night I confronted David about the documents I had found. He tried to wave them off as temporary issues, but his eyes gave him away. I pressed harder, and he finally snapped. "This is why they don't want you involved, Emily. You don't understand our world, our responsibilities, our sacrifices. You think everything is about you." The words sliced me open, but they also woke me up. All those years of bending myself to fit their mold, of swallowing my pride, to keep peace, I saw how little it had bought me. I was never going to be accepted, not because I wasn't enough, but because they needed me to believe I wasn't. It was then I knew my revenge wasn't complete. Canceling a dinner had been a message, but uncovering the truth would be justice. I started gathering evidence quietly. Receipts, emails, financial reports. Every careless mistake they left in my path I collected like jewels. Each one was proof that Margaret's empire was an illusion, and David's loyalty to her was built on sand. I worked late into the night while he slept, the glow of my laptop the only witness to my resolve. The more I found, the more my heartbreak transformed into clarity. Their exclusion hadn't been personal at all, it had been strategic. I wasn't cut out of Margaret's birthday dinner because she hated me. I was cut out because they planned to announce something there, something they didn't want me to hear until it was too late. When I finally uncovered the draft of separation papers, my suspicions crystallized into certainty. Margaret hadn't just wanted me excluded, she wanted me erased. And David, the man who had promised to love and protect me, had been willing to play his part. I stared at the papers in my hands, my chest hollow and burning all at once. They had planned to humiliate me, to cast me aside with a polite smile and a rehearsed speech about differences. They thought I would crumble quietly, but they didn't know me at all. That night, as the city lights flickered through the window, I made myself a promise. They had written my ending for me, but I would rewrite it myself. If Margaret wanted to make me the villain, then I would become the storm. And when the truth finally came crashing down, it wouldn't just shatter their illusions of perfection, it would expose everything they had tried to hide. The discovery of those separation papers ignited something inside me that had been quietly smoldering for years. It wasn't just betrayal, it was annihilation of trust. Every smile Margaret had flashed me, every promise David had whispered late at night, every time I had convinced myself to stay patient, it all collapsed under the weight of those papers. They hadn't simply excluded me from a dinner. They had been planning my erasure for months. I could have confronted David immediately, demanded answers, but confrontation would have given him the power to spin lies. No, I needed to be smarter. I needed to show them that the woman they thought was fragile was capable of dismantling the walls they had built around me. I began keeping a journal documenting everything: dates, overheard conversations, the files I copied quietly when David left his laptop unlocked. I stored backups in places even he couldn't imagine. Every entry, every screenshot, every piece of evidence became another brick in my arsenal. Margaret's empire was already crumbling. I would be the one to make sure the whole world heard the crash. The irony was not lost on me. Margaret had always believed I was beneath her, unworthy of their world, and yet I was the one standing in the ruins of her secrets, piecing together the truth she had tried so desperately to hide. One night, while David was at yet another family meeting, I went through the locked drawer in his study. He had been careless with the key, leaving it in his jacket pocket. Inside, I found more than I could have ever imagined: correspondence between Margaret and a lawyer, drafts of financial agreements that would cut me out of everything, even notes about how to spin the story to their social circle. Irreconcilable differences, the lawyer had written in the margin. I laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the empty room. Irreconcilable differences. The only difference was that I had loved David honestly, and he had loved me as long as it suited his mother. Still beneath the rage was grief. I remembered our early days, cheap dinners, long walks. His hand warm in mine before Margaret's shadow fell across us. I remembered the man who had promised me a life built on partnership, but the man who had written those notes wasn't that man anymore. He had traded his soul for his mother's approval. When he came home that night, I watched him carefully, every movement catalogued. He kissed my cheek absently, asked about my day, poured himself a drink, and all I could think was, "You're lying to me with every breath you take." The next morning, I made my choice. I would not beg for love. I would not shrink to fit into a mold that was never designed for me. If Margaret wanted a war, I would give her one. I called Elise, the journalist friend I had trusted once before in another dark season of my life. She listened quietly as I laid out the pieces: the canceled dinner, the exclusion, the financial ruins, the separation papers. "Emily," she said softly, "when I finish, this isn't just family drama. This is fraud. If what you're saying is true, they've been misrepresenting assets for years." The words sank in. Fraud. A crime, not just a betrayal. My hands trembled as I realized the scope of what I held. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity anymore, I was holding evidence that could destroy the Caldwell legacy forever. That evening, David confronted me. Margaret must have sensed my silence was too dangerous. He stood in the doorway, his jaw tight. "My mother says you've been prying where you don't belong," he said. His voice was sharp, but there was fear under it. I rose slowly, meeting his gaze. "Where I don't belong. This is my marriage, my life, my future. How dare you tell me I don't belong in the very world I've been living in?" His silence was answer enough. I took a step closer. "I know about the papers, David. The plans to erase me, to make me vanish neatly from your life. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" He blanched, his shoulders stiffening. "It wasn't like that." "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't you dare insult me with half-truths. I've given you every piece of myself and you've handed it back broken." For the first time, he looked small, his arrogance cracking like porcelain. But instead of remorse, I saw something colder: resignation. He wasn't going to fight for me. He had already chosen his side. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I packed a bag quietly, not because I was running, but because I needed space to sharpen my plan. Margaret thought she could erase me. David thought he could betray me in silence. But soon the world would see who they really were. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just ruin their carefully curated image. It would unravel every lie they had built their lives upon. I left the house with my head high, the weight of my evidence heavy in my bag. For the first time in years, I wasn't the excluded one. I wasn't the outcast. I was the one holding the match, and their empire was nothing but dry timber waiting to burn. I checked into a modest hotel on the edge of town, a place with peeling wallpaper and a flickering neon sign. But for me, it was freedom. The walls didn't whisper Margaret's disdain. The air didn't choke me with David's lies. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I laid out my evidence across the small desk pages, spilling like confessions, financial ledgers, emails, the separation papers. Each document wasn't just proof of betrayal, it was a weapon, and I intended to wield them all. Elise met me the next morning, her notepad ready, her eyes sharp with curiosity and resolve. As I handed her the stack of papers, my hands trembled not with fear, but with the weight of the choice I was making. Once this story left my lips, there would be no turning back. Elise flipped through the documents, her brows furrowing deeper with every page. "Emily," she whispered, "this isn't just family dysfunction. This is systemic fraud. If this comes out, the Caldwells will lose everything." The thought of Margaret's empire crumbling brought a strange ache to my chest. I had once wished for her approval, longed to be folded into her world. Now I realized her empire wasn't worth belonging to. It was built on lies, exclusion, and exploitation. Destroying it wasn't just revenge, it was justice. But justice is never simple. Elise warned me that once the article went public, the backlash would be fierce. Margaret wouldn't go down quietly. David wouldn't accept humiliation without a fight. I would be painted as vindictive, unstable, the bitter wife seeking to ruin her husband's family. I swallowed hard, imagining the headlines, the judgment. But then I remembered every dinner I had been excluded from, every whispered laugh at my expense, every lonely night I had cried myself to sleep. Their cruelty had already destroyed my reputation inside their circle. Now it was my turn to rewrite the narrative. The night before Elise's article was set to publish, David showed up at the hotel. He looked different, hollow, worn, like the scaffolding of his pride had finally collapsed. "Emily," he said softly, standing in the doorway like a stranger, "please don't do this." I stared at him, my heart heavy but resolute. "Why, David?" "So you can protect your mother. So you can pretend that I never existed." He stepped closer, desperation in his eyes. "It will ruin us all. My mother, my sisters, me. Everything we've built." I laughed bitterly. "Everything you built was on lies. And you didn't think twice about ruining me, did you? You planned to cast me aside like I was disposable. You had your speech ready, your papers signed. Don't you dare come here asking me to save you from the fire you lit." For a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw regret flicker across his face. But it was too little, too late. "You chose her, David," I whispered. "You always chose her. And now you'll live with the consequences." He left without another word, and I felt no urge to call him back. The man I had loved was gone, swallowed by the shadow of his mother. The next morning, Elise's article went live. The headline blazed across news sites: "The Caldwell Legacy, Wealth Lies, and Betrayal." It spread like wildfire. Reporters swarmed the Caldwell estate, investors pulled out, friends distanced themselves. Margaret's name, once spoken with reverence, became synonymous with disgrace. The phone calls started almost immediately. David, his sisters, even Margaret herself. I ignored them all. My silence was louder than any answer I could give. When David finally sent a single text, "How could you?" I stared at it for a long moment before replying with just 2 words: "Now you know." The fallout was brutal. Margaret's carefully curated image as a philanthropist and matriarch shattered. David's career in the family business imploded overnight. Their home, their parties, their perfect façade, it all collapsed under the weight of truth. And while they scrambled to salvage what they could, I stood on the outside at last, not excluded, but liberated. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. Watching the man I once loved crumble, seeing the family that had tormented me reduced to ruins. It wasn't joy I felt. It was grief, twisted and complicated. Because revenge doesn't erase scars. It doesn't restore the years you lost. It only ensures that those who hurt you finally feel the weight of what they've done. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, I sat on the balcony of my hotel and let myself cry, not for them, but for me. For the woman I had been, the one who had begged for a seat at their table. The one who had believed love could conquer Margaret's cruelty. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone harder, wiser. Someone who had learned that sometimes You don't get family, you build it yourself. The weeks that followed were a blur of headlines, lawsuits, and whispers that traveled faster than fire. The Caldwells, once untouchable, became the centerpiece of scandal. Every socialite who had once clung to Margaret's coattails suddenly forgot her number. David's business partners abandoned him, and the empire that had stood for decades collapsed in real time, brick by brick, under the gaze of the public. And me? I watched from the quiet corner of my modest hotel room, sipping coffee, while the world feasted on their downfall. It should have tasted sweet, that revenge, but it was something far more complicated. Victory wasn't the soaring triumph I had imagined. It was quieter, lonelier. It was the realization that justice and heartbreak can sit side by side in the same heart. David came to me once more weeks after the article. He didn't look like the man I had married. His shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow, his pride stripped bare. He begged me to meet him at a small cafe, the same one where we had once dreamed about a life together. I almost didn't go, but curiosity pulled me there. When I arrived, he stood as if he still remembered how to be a gentleman, but the gesture rang hollow. "Emily," he said softly, "I've lost everything. My mother. She won't even look at me. My sisters blame me for trusting you, and maybe they're right." I studied him, my hands wrapped around the warmth of my cup. "They're right about one thing," I said evenly. "You did trust me, but only after you betrayed me first. That's the only reason I could hurt you. You gave me the reason." His lips parted, searching for words that didn't come. Finally he whispered, "I did love you once." Once, I echoed the word, bitter on my tongue. "But when it mattered, you chose her, and I'll never forget that." He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. That small gesture sealed it for me. Whatever we had, whatever thread of love still lingered, it was gone. He left the cafe with his head bowed, and I didn't watch him go. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the abandoned one. I was the one walking away. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life. Not from the ruins of their empire, but from the strength I had found in myself. I took the evidence I hadn't given to Elise, the parts that tied their corruption to broader fraud, and handed it to investigators. The law would deal with them now. My role was finished. Slowly, I stitched myself into a new circle of people, friends who saw me, who didn't measure my worth by my name or my weight at their table. I even started volunteering at a women's shelter, sitting with strangers who carried stories like mine of exclusion, of betrayal, of clawing their way back to dignity. In their eyes, I saw reflections of my own pain, but also glimmers of resilience, and in helping them, I began to heal myself. Sometimes late at night, I still thought of Margaret. I wondered if she sat alone in her mansion, stripped of the adoration she had once bathed in, finally forced to face the hollowness of her reign. I wondered if David lay awake, haunted by the choices that had cost him everything. And though I no longer wished them happiness, I also no longer wished them pain. They had already written their own punishment, and I had simply turned the page. The greatest revenge, I realized, wasn't destroying them. It was surviving them. It was standing taller, freer, unbroken, while their empire crumbled to dust around them. If you've stayed with me through this story, maybe you've felt the sting of exclusion too. Maybe you've been told you're not enough, that you don't belong, that your voice should stay quiet. But hear me. You are not defined by the people who reject you. You are defined by the strength you find when you refuse to be erased. So if my story resonated with you, I ask you from the bottom of my heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment and tell me your story. Because our voices woven together are stronger than any silence they tried to trap us in. And sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't payback at all. It's reclaiming your power, your dignity, your life.